The courtroom was silent, too silent. Marcus Reed stood in an orange county-issued jumpsuit, wrists cuffed in front of him, eyes fixed on the polished wood of the defense table. Sentencing day. After 6 weeks of testimony, 3 days of deliberation, and a guilty verdict for second-degree murder, this was supposed to be the final chapter. Judge Eleanor Whitmore adjusted her glasses and glanced down at the file before her. "Mr. Reed," she began, her voice steady and authoritative, "today this court will determine—" A chair scraped loudly in the gallery. The sound sliced through the room, heads turned. On the left side of the courtroom, a man in his late 50s rose abruptly. His jaw was clenched, hands trembling at his sides. It was Thomas Hale, the victim's father. The bailiff stepped forward immediately. "Sir, you need to remain seated." Thomas didn't move. "He doesn't get to stand there like nothing happened," he said, voice thick with emotion. Marcus finally looked up. Their eyes met. That was the spark. "You look at me?" Thomas snapped, stepping into the aisle. "You look at me after what you did?" Gasps echoed across the room. Judge Whitmore struck the gavel once. "Mr. Hale, sit down immediately." But grief doesn't obey procedure. Thomas lunged forward. It happened fast. A relative seated behind him tried to grab his jacket. The chair tipped. Another family member stood up, shouting. In the chaos, someone from Marcus's side of the gallery stood too. His cousin, Darren. "Back off," Darren yelled, moving toward Thomas. The bailiffs rushed in. What started as shouting turned into shoving. A program booklet flew across the aisle. A woman screamed. The jury box was empty. Deliberations were over, but the courtroom still held press. Extended family and spectators. Thomas swung. It wasn't clean, and it didn't land fully, but it was enough. Darren pushed back. Now it was a full scuffle in the center aisle of a murder sentencing hearing. Judge Whitmore stood. "Enough!" Her voice cracked through the room like a whip. "Bailiffs, clear. The courtroom!" Marcus remained frozen as 2 officers moved to shield him instinctively. "Everyone who cannot control themselves will be removed immediately." The gavel struck again. Harder. Thomas was restrained first. He didn't resist once the weight of what he'd done seemed to settle in. Darren was pulled backward by 2 officers. The shouting slowly faded into heavy breathing and muffled sobs. "Unbelievable," Judge Whitmore said, her tone no longer patient. The gallery was thinned within minutes. Only essential parties remained. Thomas stood near the door, chest rising sharply, eyes wet but defiant. "Sir," the judge said, locking eyes with him, "I understand grief. I will not tolerate violence in my courtroom." Thomas swallowed but said nothing. She turned to Darren. "And you will not escalate an already volatile situation." Darren nodded stiffly. The courtroom settled again, but the air had changed. Thicker. Heavier. Judge Whitmore sat back down slowly. "This proceeding will not be dictated by emotion." Marcus stared forward again, jaw tight. The judge's voice regained its formal cadence. "Mr. Reed, before this interruption, I was prepared to issue sentencing." She paused deliberately. "But what just occurred demonstrates something important." Silence returned, fragile but present. Murder does not end with one life lost. It fractures families. It destabilizes communities. And it reduces dignity, if we allow it, to chaos. Thomas lowered his gaze. Judge Whitmore continued. "This courtroom is a place for justice, not retaliation." Marcus shifted slightly. "For the record," she said, "sentencing will proceed." Thomas's voice, softer now, broke the silence. "He took my son." The judge looked at him, not coldly, but firmly. "And nothing that happens in this room today will bring him back." Thomas's composure cracked. The victim impact statement folder rested untouched on the prosecution table. The prosecutor rose carefully. "Your Honor, the family would still like the opportunity to speak." The judge nodded. "They will." She turned back to Marcus. "Mr. Reed, you have been convicted of taking a life during what you claim was a heated confrontation. Marcus finally spoke. It wasn't supposed to happen. Thomas's jaw tightened again, but he remained seated this time. The judge's eyes did not soften. Intent does not erase consequence. She flipped a page. You had prior opportunities to walk away. Marcus said nothing. You chose escalation. Then words landed hard. Outside the courtroom doors, the faint sound of reporters gathering could already be heard. Inside, the temperature felt colder. Judge Whitmore folded her hands. This court will take a 5-minute recess to restore order. After that, we will proceed with victim impact statements and final sentencing. The gavel fell again. Marcus was escorted briefly to a side holding area. Thomas remained seated this time, shoulders slumped. Darren avoided eye contact entirely. The fight had lasted less than 30 seconds, but it had delayed the inevitable, and when the courtroom reconvened, no one would mistake this for just another sentencing hearing. 5 minutes later, the courtroom doors reopened. The atmosphere was different now, quieter, controlled, but no less intense. Marcus Reed was escorted back in, wrists still cuffed, expression rigid. He didn't look toward the gallery this time. Thomas Hale remained seated in the front row. His hands were clasped tightly together, knuckles pale, grief pressed down into silence. Judge Whitmore entered again. All rise. They sat. The judge surveyed the room carefully before speaking. This court will now proceed without interruption. Any further outbursts will result in immediate removal and potential contempt charges. Her gaze lingered a moment longer on both sides of the gallery. Then she nodded to the prosecutor. Call your first speaker. The prosecutor stood slowly. Your Honor, the state calls Mrs. Linda Hale. A woman in her early 50s rose from the front row. She looked smaller than before the trial began. Grief had a way of compressing people. She approached the podium carefully, holding several folded sheets of paper in trembling hands. The clerk swore her in. She nodded. Judge Whitmore softened her tone slightly. You may proceed when ready. Linda unfolded the paper. For a moment, no words came. Then, my son's name was Ethan. The name settled into the courtroom like a presence. Was 26 years old. Marcus closed his eyes briefly. He wasn't perfect, she continued, voice shaking. He made mistakes. But he didn't deserve to die in a parking lot over an argument. Marcus inhaled sharply. Thomas stared straight ahead. Linda continued. I replay that night every single day. I imagine if he had walked away, if someone had stepped in, if... Her voice cracked. She steadied herself. But what hurts the most is knowing he was afraid in his final moments. Marcus's jaw tightened. The prosecutor kept his gaze downward. Linda looked directly at Marcus for the first time. You took his future. You took birthdays, weddings, children we'll never meet. The courtroom was utterly still. And then today, she added quietly, we watched this room nearly turn into another fight. Her eyes filled. Violence is what brought us here, and violence will not fix it. Thomas lowered his head. Judge Whitmore nodded slightly, allowing the weight of that statement to linger. Linda folded the paper. I don't hate you, she said to Marcus, but I will never forgive what you did. She stepped back. There was no applause, no sound at all, only breathing. The prosecutor stood again. The state calls Mr. Thomas Hale. Thomas rose more slowly this time. He did not look at Marcus immediately. When he reached the podium, he didn't use notes. My son trusted people, he began. Even when he shouldn't have. He glanced briefly toward Marcus. You say it. Wasn't supposed to happen. That it got out of hand. His voice deepened. You had a choice. Marcus stared forward. You could have walked away. Silence. But you didn't. Thomas swallowed hard. I lost my temper today, he admitted, and that's on me. Judge Whitmore listened carefully, but the difference is, I didn't take a life. The words landed with force. Thomas stepped back without another sentence. He returned to his seat, shoulders heavy. Judge Whitmore waited a moment before speaking. "Mr. Reed," she said, voice firm but measured. "You may address the court." Marcus stood. The chains at his wrist made a faint metallic sound. He cleared his throat. "I know saying sorry doesn't change anything." No one reacted. "I didn't wake up that day planning to hurt anyone." The prosecutor watched him closely. "It was an argument. Words got heated. He pushed me." A murmur rippled faintly. Marcus continued quickly. "I pushed back." He paused. He fell. The judge's eyes narrowed slightly. "The medical examiner's report states blunt force trauma inconsistent with a single fall." Marcus swallowed. "I panicked." Thomas closed his eyes. "I didn't mean for it to go that far." The courtroom remained impassive. Marcus looked toward Linda. "I think about it every night." Linda didn't respond. Marcus's voice grew quieter. "I would take it back if I could." Judge Whitmore leaned forward slightly. "But you cannot." Marcus said nothing. The judge folded her hands. "This court has reviewed the evidence thoroughly." Her tone shifted, formal, precise. "You were convicted of second-degree murder. The jury determined your actions demonstrated reckless disregard for human life." Marcus stared at the floor. "You had the opportunity to disengage. You escalated." Each word was deliberate. "Today's disruption underscores the consequences of unchecked anger." She glanced briefly toward the gallery. "Emotion is human. Violence is a choice." The courtroom held its breath. Judge Whitmore lifted the sentencing document. "Mr. Marcus Reed." The air felt suspended. "For the charge of second-degree murder, this court sentences you to—" A sudden noise echoed from the back. Not shouting, not another fight. The courtroom doors creaked open again. Everyone turned instinctively. A court. Officer stepped inside hurriedly, approaching the bench with visible urgency. He leaned toward the judge and whispered. Judge Whitmore's expression changed, just slightly, controlled, but alert. She nodded once, then looked back at the courtroom. "There has been a development." The words hung sharply in the air. Sentencing paused mid-sentence. Marcus lifted his head slowly. Thomas straightened in his seat. The prosecutor frowned. Judge Whitmore's tone remained measured. "New information has been submitted to this court." The room felt smaller again, tighter. "And before sentencing can be finalized," she said, "this information must be addressed." Marcus's breathing quickened. Thomas looked confused. The judge placed the document down carefully. "This hearing is temporarily suspended." The gavel struck once, and for the second time that day, sentencing was delayed. The courtroom did not erupt this time. It froze. Marcus remained standing at the defense table, the weight of the unfinished sentence hanging over him like a suspended blade. Thomas Hale looked toward the bench, confusion overtaking anger. The prosecutor leaned in toward his assistant, whispering sharply. Judge Whitmore did not speak again until the courtroom doors were sealed. Then, "For the record," she said calmly, "the court has received new evidentiary material relevant to sentencing considerations." Marcus's attorney stood immediately. "Your Honor, we were not notified of any such material." "You are being notified now," the judge replied evenly. The bailiff handed a sealed envelope to the defense. Marcus watched his attorney tear it open. Her eyes scanned the contents, then paused, then tightened. Marcus felt it before she even spoke. "What is it?" he whispered. She didn't answer right away. The prosecutor rose. "Your Honor, the state was informed less than 15 minutes ago. We have not yet reviewed the material in full." Judge Whitmore nodded. "Understood." Thomas shifted, forward in his seat. "What is going on?" he asked quietly. The judge looked toward the witness stand. "An individual has come forward with a sworn affidavit concerning the events of the night Mr. Hale died." The courtroom absorbed that slowly. Marcus felt his pulse spike. "Affidavit? he repeated under his breath. The judge continued. The affidavit suggests that the altercation may not have involved only two individuals. A murmur spread instantly. Thomas stood halfway before catching himself and sitting again. Marcus turned sharply toward his attorney. That's not possible. She leaned close. Do not react. Judge Whitmore's tone remained surgical. The individual claims to have been present in the parking lot that evening. The prosecutor's expression darkened. Your Honor, the state's case was built on surveillance footage, eyewitness testimony, and forensic reconstruction. No third party was identified. And yet, the judge said evenly, we now have a signed statement asserting otherwise. The air felt thin. Marcus's breathing grew heavier. Thomas shook his head. No, we sat through the entire trial. The judge met his gaze. And the court takes this extremely seriously. The prosecutor stepped forward. Your Honor, may we know the identity of this affiant? The judge glanced at the document. His name is Victor Alvarez. Silence. Marcus went rigid. The name hit him like impact. Thomas noticed. You know him, Thomas said sharply. Marcus said nothing. Judge Whitmore watched carefully. Mr. Reed, she said. Do you recognize that name? Marcus swallowed. His attorney cut in quickly. My client will not answer without consultation. The judge nodded once. Very well. The prosecutor spoke carefully. Your Honor, what does the affidavit allege? Judge Whitmore looked down again. It alleges that Victor Alvarez was engaged in a physical confrontation with Mr. Hale prior to Mr. Reed's involvement. The courtroom shifted violently in mood. Thomas stood again. That's a lie. Mr. Hale, the judge warned. He sat back down, trembling. Marcus's attorney whispered urgently. Was he there? Marcus closed his eyes briefly. I didn't see him, he said under his breath. Answer me clearly, she pressed. I didn't see him, but doubt flickered across his face. The prosecutor continued. Your Honor, is this individual currently present? Judge Whitmore nodded slowly. He is. Every head turned toward the courtroom doors. The bailiff stepped forward. Bring him in. The doors opened. A man in his early 30s entered cautiously, unshaven, nervous, wearing a wrinkled button-down shirt. Victor Alvarez. Thomas stared at him, confused. Marcus looked stunned. Victor avoided eye contact entirely. He was sworn. And quickly, Judge Whitmore leaned forward. You understand you are under oath? Yes, ma'am. His voice was tight. You submitted this affidavit voluntarily? Yes. The prosecutor approached carefully. Mr. Alvarez, why are you coming forward now? Victor hesitated. Because I saw what happened. Thomas gripped the bench in front of him. You're lying, he muttered. Judge Whitmore struck the gavel lightly. Proceed. Victor swallowed. I was in the parking lot that night. The prosecutor's tone sharpened. And you did not come forward during investigation? No, why not? Victor looked briefly toward Marcus. Then away. Because I had a warrant out for a probation violation. The courtroom murmured. So you hid, the prosecutor said. Yes. And now? Victor's jaw tightened. I saw the coverage. I saw sentencing was today. Marcus's breathing grew shallow. Victor continued. They're saying Marcus just attacked him. That is what the jury found, the prosecutor replied. Victor shook his head. That's not how it started. The courtroom leaned forward, collectively. Thomas stared at him with disbelief. Judge Whitmore spoke calmly. Tell this court exactly what you claim to have witnessed. Victor inhaled deeply. Ethan Hale was arguing with Marcus. Loud, shoving. Marcus stared at the floor. Victor continued. But before that, before Marcus even touched him, I saw Ethan swing at someone else. The silence was suffocating. Thomas stood again instinctively. My son would not sit down, the judge ordered firmly. Victor continued quickly. He thought I was someone else. He hit me first, gasps echoed. Marcus's head snapped up. You were there? He said before stopping himself. His attorney squeezed his arm. Victor nodded slightly. He was drunk. He thought I'd dented his car. Thomas shook his head violently. No, no. The prosecutor stepped closer. And then? Marcus stepped in. Marcus looked pale. To break it up? The prosecutor asked. Victor hesitated. At first. The room felt suspended again. At first? Judge Whitmore pressed. Victor swallowed. They both started swinging. Thomas's face collapsed in confusion. The prosecutor's tone hardened. You are telling this court that Mr. Hale initiated physical contact with you? Yes. And that Mr. Reed intervened? Yes. And then escalated. Victor lowered his eyes. Yes. The complexity of it settled heavily. Judge Whitmore leaned back slowly. This information was not presented to the jury. No, Your Honor, the prosecutor admitted. Thomas looked shattered. Marcus looked like the ground had shifted under him. The judge's voice was measured, precise. This court cannot ignore new sworn testimony that may bear on the degree of culpability. The word culpability echoed. Sentencing for second-degree murder suddenly no longer felt stable. Marcus's attorney stood. Your Honor, we request immediate evidentiary review and reconsideration of sentencing classification. The prosecutor inhaled sharply. Your Honor, this individual avoided testifying for months. His credibility is deeply questionable. Victor's voice trembled. I'm telling the truth, Thomas whispered, barely audible. My son. Judge. Whitmore raised her hand. Enough. Silence fell instantly. This court will not decide credibility in haste. She looked directly at Marcus. Sentencing is vacated pending evidentiary hearing. Gasps filled the courtroom. Marcus exhaled. Sharply. Thomas closed his eyes in pain. Judge Whitmore's gavel struck again. This matter is continued. For the third time that day, justice had been interrupted, but this time, not by chaos, by doubt. The word doubt lingered in the courtroom long after the gavel fell. Marcus Reed sat motionless. Moments ago, he had been seconds away from a decades-long sentence now. Everything was uncertain. Judge Whitmore remained seated, reviewing the affidavit again while counsel approached the bench. Your Honor, the prosecutor began quietly, the jury has already rendered a verdict. This testimony affects sentencing, not guilt. It may affect degree, the judge replied. Marcus's attorney spoke carefully. If Mr. Hale initiated physical violence with a third party, that context is material. It may support imperfect self-defense or mitigation. The prosecutor's jaw tightened. Or it may be an opportunist attempting to insert himself for attention. Judge Whitmore looked toward Victor Alvarez, who stood alone near the witness stand, visibly overwhelmed. Mr. Alvarez, she called. He looked up. Remain present. You are not to leave this courthouse. Yes, ma'am. Thomas Hale rose slowly. So now what? He asked, voice hollow. The judge met his gaze evenly. Now we ensure the sentence reflects the full truth. Thomas shook his head. The truth was already told. The prosecutor placed a steadying hand on his arm. Judge Whitmore's voice was firm, but not unkind. If this affidavit is false, it will collapse under scrutiny. If it is not, this court cannot ignore it. Marcus watched Thomas. For the first time that day, Thomas did not look angry. He looked tired. The judge continued. This court orders an expedited evidentiary hearing within 72 hours. She turned to both counsel. You will prepare accordingly. Surveillance, phone records, forensic timelines, everything will be re-examined. The prosecutor nodded reluctantly. Marcus's attorney exhaled slowly. Marcus leaned toward her. Does this help me? He whispered. It buys time, she replied quietly. Time. For Thomas, it felt like torture. For Marcus, it felt like oxygen. Victor shifted nervously. The judge addressed him again. Mr. Alvarez, understand this clearly. If you are fabricating this account, you are committing perjury. I understand. And if you are truthful, you should have come forward months ago. His shoulders dropped. I was scared. The judge's expression remained neutral. Fear does not absolve civic responsibility. She closed the file deliberately. This hearing is adjourned. The gavel struck once more, but this time, no one moved immediately, because what had begun as a sentencing had transformed into something far more fragile, a recalculation of justice. Bailiffs began escorting people out. Marcus was placed back in custody restraints. As he passed Thomas, their eyes met again. Thomas did not lunge. He did not speak. He simply looked at him with something more complicated than rage, uncertainty. Victor remained near the side wall, as if unsure whether to step forward or disappear. The prosecutor approached him. "You understand we're going to verify every second of your story?" Victor nodded. "I know. Phone pings, street cameras, witness canvassing. I know. And if you're lying, I'm not." But his voice lacked strength. Across the room, Marcus's attorney gathered her files quickly. "We need to reconstruct that night minute by minute," she said under her breath. Marcus nodded. "You didn't see him?" She pressed again. Marcus hesitated. "There was someone near the vending machine." Her eyes sharpened. "You never mentioned that." "I didn't think it mattered." She stared at him. "It matters now." Outside the courtroom, reporters were already speaking into cameras. Sentencing delayed after dramatic courtroom fight and surprise witness. Inside, Judge Whitmore remained seated for a moment longer after everyone had left. She reviewed the autopsy summary again: blunt force trauma, impact angle, concrete surface. She knew one thing clearly. If Ethan Hale threw the first punch, it did not excuse his death. But it could change how the law defined Marcus Reed's state of mind. And state of mind was everything in sentencing. 72 hours. That was all. 3 days to determine whether justice had nearly been finalized too soon. 3 days to decide whether the courtroom chaos was a distraction or a warning. As Marcus was led down the hallway toward holding, he finally allowed himself to breathe. Not relief, not hope, but possibility. Behind him, Thomas exited through a different door. Linda walked beside him quietly. "Do you believe him?" she asked softly. Thomas stared straight ahead. "I don't know what to believe anymore." And that uncertainty was far more destabilizing than anger, because anger is solid. Doubt moves, and over the next 72 hours, doubt would either collapse the case or confirm it beyond question. The evidentiary hearing began exactly 72 hours later. No chaos this time, no shouting, no lunges, only tension. Victor Alvarez sat on the stand again, this time under full cross-examination. The prosecution moved first. "Mr. Alvarez," the prosecutor said evenly, "you claim Ethan Hale struck you first." "Yes." "You claim Mr. Reed intervened." "Yes." "And you claim this occurred before the fatal escalation." "Yes." The prosecutor nodded. "Let's look at the timeline." A large monitor flickered to life. Parking lot surveillance footage. Grainy. Distant, but clear enough. Timestamp: 11:42 p.m. The video showed Ethan and Marcus arguing, shoving. The prosecutor paused it. "Do you see yourself in this frame?" Victor leaned forward. "No." The prosecutor played the footage forward. 11:43 p.m. Ethan swings. Marcus stumbles back. They collide again. No third figure visible. The prosecutor froze the frame. There is no third individual. Victor's throat tightened. "I was outside the camera angle." The prosecutor nodded. "Let's widen the angle." The footage switched to a second camera, a different corner, broader coverage, empty, no Victor. The courtroom went silent. The prosecutor stepped closer. "You said Ethan mistook you for someone who dented his car." "Yes." "Phone records show you were 3 miles away at 11:39 p.m. Victor froze. The screen displayed cell tower data. Your phone pinged near East Ridge Avenue. Victor blinked rapidly. That's not accurate. The prosecutor didn't blink. It's precise. The air shifted. Judge Whitmore leaned forward slightly. Mr. Alvarez, she said carefully, were you present in that parking lot? Victor's composure began to fracture. I thought I saw him earlier that night. The prosecutor's voice hardened. Earlier is not the same as present. Victor's breathing became uneven. Marcus stared at him in disbelief. You weren't there, Marcus whispered. Victor avoided eye contact. I was trying to help. Thomas stood halfway, then forced himself down. Judge Whitmore's tone sharpened. Help whom? Victor swallowed. Marcus. Silence detonated in the room. The prosecutor didn't hesitate. Why? Victor finally looked up. Because it wasn't supposed to go this far. Marcus's eyes widened. You said you weren't there, his attorney hissed under her breath. Victor's voice cracked. He told me it got out of control. The courtroom inhaled sharply. The prosecutor moved in. When did he tell you that? 2 days after the arrest. Marcus closed his eyes. The prosecutor turned to the judge. Your Honor, this is not a witness correcting the record. This is a friend attempting to manufacture mitigation. Judge Whitmore's expression hardened. Mr. Alvarez, she said evenly, did Mr. Reed ask you to submit this affidavit? Victor hesitated. That hesitation said everything. Judge Whitmore repeated the question. Did he? Victor's shoulders collapsed. He didn't ask directly. The prosecutor stepped forward. But you spoke to him? Yes. And you knew sentencing was today? Yes. And you decided to intervene? Yes. The truth was now unmistakable. Victor had not come to correct justice. He had come to bend it. Judge Whitmore's voice dropped into steel. This court does not tolerate manipulation. She looked at Marcus. Mr. Reed, stand. Marcus rose slowly. For the first time since the trial began, he looked smaller. Not defensive, not angry, exposed. Judge Whitmore continued. Your attempt to introduce fabricated mitigation speaks directly to your character. Marcus shook his head. I didn't tell him to lie. You did not stop him, the judge replied. Silence. Thomas watched, breathing steadily. No rage this time. Only finality. Judge Whitmore turned back to Victor. You will be referred for perjury investigation. Victor nodded weakly. Bailiffs escorted him out. The courtroom doors shut behind him. No one moved. Judge Whitmore lifted the sentencing document again. This court reconvenes the previously vacated sentencing. Her tone was measured, decisive. Mr. Marcus Reed, the jury found you guilty of second-degree murder. She paused deliberately. The evidence was overwhelming. The escalation was yours. Marcus stared straight ahead. You were not defending yourself. The words cut cleanly. You were not breaking up a fight. Another pause. You were winning one. The courtroom felt frozen in place. Your actions demonstrated reckless disregard for human life. Thomas closed his eyes. Linda gripped his hand. Judge Whitmore continued. For the charge of second-degree murder, this court sentences you to 28 years to life in state prison. The words landed with irreversible weight. Marcus exhaled sharply. The sound wasn't protest. It was surrender. You will be remanded into custody immediately, the gavel struck. This time, it did not pause mid-sentence. Marcus was turned by the bailiffs. As he passed the gallery, he looked toward Thomas one last time. Thomas did not lunge. He did not shout. He simply held his son's photograph tightly against his chest. Marcus opened his mouth as if to speak. Nothing came out. The doors closed behind him. And just like that, it was over. Judge Whitmore remained seated for a moment longer. Then she addressed the courtroom one final time. Grief does not justify violence. Her eyes moved across both families. Nor does fear justify deception. She set down her file. Justice is not loud. It is not chaotic. A final pause. It is deliberate. The courtroom emptied slowly. No cheering, no celebration. Only the quiet understanding that accountability had finally been sealed. Outside, reporters waited for reaction. Inside, Thomas stood beside Linda. "Do you feel better?" she asked softly. Thomas looked toward the now empty defense table. "No," he said honestly. Then he looked at the bench. "But I feel finished." And sometimes, in a courtroom filled with anger, lies, and delay, finished is the closest thing justice allows.